Hello, it's Evan here, coming at you with verbs number 2, the mas form. This would be our second video about verbs in the individual grammar lessons. In Japanese, there are many different types of verb forms. You'll hear about the plain form, you'll hear about the distal/polite form, you will hear about the humble form, you'll hear about the honorific form. Today we're learning about the quote-unquote mas form. This is the polite form, this is the distal form. It can also be called the distal form, or in Japanese it's called the teinego, which is pretty much polite speech. Many Japanese textbooks start off teaching this form as opposed to the plain form because it's the more polite way to speak. You're less likely to anger someone if you learn this form. Also, many of the ritualistic expressions, such as ohayo gozaimasu, end in the mas form. Onegai shimasu, ohayo gozaimasu, things like that. They all end in the mas. Ohayo gozaru is very not normal. Since we're learning the mas form, let's discuss when to use it. The mas form of the verb is used almost exclusively, but not always, but usually, as a sentence final verb, as in it's the last verb in the sentence. Not always, but very frequently. You'll occasionally get a ga or something like that, a mas followed by a ga, and things like that. But generally, we're talking about this is the sentence final verb, the last verb in the sentence. It is rarely, well, really not rarely, but it's less than frequently found in the middle of a sentence. You will find it in the middle of a sentence, just usually there's a conjugation after it, or a connecting particle after it to some extent. Like kara or kedo. These are sort of like clauses, aka sort of mini sentences, so technically it's still a sentence final, but that's not really worth dwelling on. Just pointing out that in general you're going to find mas at the end of sentences. Mas form examples, and we're not talking about the green stuff that grows on rocks. Ha 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 ha! Yeah, I'm brilliant. Here are some polite form / distal form / teinego examples. I'm going to be calling them the mas form. So if you can't handle me calling them the mas form, then sorry. That's just what I'm going to call them. Notice these verbs from on the left. Tabemasu, to eat. Nomimasu, to drink. Koroshimasu, to kill. Ikimasu, to go. Mimasu, to see, to watch, to look. Kimasu, to come. This could also be to wear clothing if you want to do that. There's probably another kimasu that I don't want to think about right now. And there's also really quickly, notice how these all end in mas. Mas. Evan, isn't it masu? It is masu, but when we're talking about sentence ending verbs, which are usually the mas, we don't pronounce that u at the end. It's just mas. There's also the copula / the be verb / the connector verb / 8 billion different ways of saying the word des, de arimasu, or de aru, or things like that. All those little words that mean is. Here are the mas form equivalents of des. Des or de arimasu. They're pretty much the same. I'm sure some native speakers are going to yell at me, but generally, give or take, they're the same. Des equals de arimasu. You're going to see des way more often than de arimasu, but you need to be aware that de arimasu is des. This is one reason why most sentences that end in arimasu generally don't have a de in them. They do frequently, but it's a common mistake in English speakers to accidentally say that something exists in a location using the de particle. For example, computer ga heya de arimasu. That would be incorrect. You'd actually be accidentally saying that the computer is a room instead of the computer is in the room. Okay, normally it would be ni. Usages. Continuing on with usages. You've probably already guessed the reasons why the polite form of the verb is used. It's to be polite. Derp. Yeah, exactly. It's to be polite. When you are talking to somebody you're not familiar with, or someone that you'd really prefer not to accidentally insult, or maybe somebody who's higher up on the corporate chain than you are, or a teacher or something to that effect that you're not quite familiar with, it's better to use the mas form in your verb with your your sentence ending verbs. It's better to use the mas form. One of my textbooks, the one that I used in college, entitled Japanese, the Spoken Language, it's a great book if you have a native speaker to coach you through it, calls the mas form, they call it the distal form, which is a weird word. There's no distillation going on. This dist comes from the idea of distance. The reason why they call it the distal form is because it sort of puts a social distance between you and the listener. So if I were to talk mas to you, it would be kind of like saying, I respect the fact that there is a distance between us socially. You and me ain't bros, yo dog. Ficka Alright, let's go on and look at some conjugations. First and foremost, what the heck is a conjugation? Think of the following sentences. The dog eats meat. The dog will not have been eating meat. The meat was eaten by the dog. The dog didn't eat meat. The dog ate meat. The dog had been eating meat. Notice how every single sentence is pretty much the same. There's a dog, there's some meat, and in between those two things the verb eat happens. However, notice how each one happens or doesn't happen. In the first one, the dog is the one who eats the meat. That's pretty easy. The dog will not have been eating meat. Notice how there's continuations, how it's actually in the future, and yet there's still a past tense feeling to it. At the future point in time that we're talking about, there will not have been any eating of meat by the dog. So in the future, at that future point, the past of that future point, there will be no continuous action of meat eating. Very strange. The next one. The meat was eaten by the dog. Here we have a passive tense. So notice how the dog is not the subject of that sentence, even though he's the one doing the action. The dog didn't eat the meat. Notice how we just negated the original sentence. He did not eat the meat. Oh, and we made it past tense. It's a negative past tense sentence. Anyway, all of these things, the only thing that's different is what we did to the verb. Those are all sort of conjugations. When a different action takes place, but it's still the same verb, they're all eat, but the actions are different, we conjugate the verb to show the difference in action. We have to change what the verb does to differentiate the actual events that took place. In English, I would imagine in some languages they don't actually conjugate the verb, but in Japanese and English we do conjugate the verb. Okay, verbs number 2, conjugations, continued. Let's look at the be verbs / the copula. I'm going to call them be verbs or des and arimasen. These are the 4 basic conjugations. We have positive, negative, positive past, and negative past. These are sort of the general 4 that you're going to learn with any language. Maybe not any language, but generally these are the big ones. Habitual means that something happens frequently or often, i.e. I go to school every day. I eat chicken once a week. Future means things happen in the future. I will go, I will eat. These two in Japanese have the same form, so that's a little bit tricky when you're translating. Things can be happening continuously, or they could be happening in the future and it'll look the same. In this column we have past / completed, so things did happen, things things happened. In this row we have the positive, which is things do happen, things did happen, things will happen. And here we have the negative, things did not happen, things will not happen, things didn't happen. If I already said that, I apologize. So, positive habitual, we have des or de arimasu. Both work. And those mean is, are, be, or am, because English has a bajillion different is verbs. Here we have the positive past, which is things did happen. Deshita or de arimashita. Both of those translate to generally was or were. I didn't write that down, but it should be were is there too, because plurality exists. Here we have the negative habitual. De wa arimasen, ja arimasen, ja nai desu, de wa nai desu. All of these qualify as negative habitual or future tense of des. This is either something is not or something will not be. to that effect. Then here we have the negative past. ではありませんでした。じゃありませんでした。じゃなかったです。ではなかったです。All of these are fine. And these all translate to wasn't or weren't or things to that effect. Those are the conjugations for the verb des and de arimasu. So if you want to say, I am a chicken, 私は chicken です。I was a chicken, 私は chicken でした。I am not a chicken, 私は chicken ではありません。I was not a chicken, perhaps maybe I am now. 私は chicken ではありませんでした。That's how those 4 verb conjugations work with des. The negatives get confusing because you will commonly find the plain form of the version des used. If you notice how we have janakata, janakata is sort of a... You see how they end in des? That's kind of strange that you have des in a negative past tense. That's all. Here we have des as well in a negative. So it's kind of weird to see the word des in some of them. You will very frequently find these two that end in des, even though they're past tense and even though they're negative. Just be aware that des is there. This nai makes it negative in these ones. Nakata is the same thing as the nai, but past tense nakata. It'll be less confusing in the future, I promise. More conjugations. The basic conjugations of mas verbs continues. This is with general mas verbs. For example, ikimasu, and this works for almost every mas verb besides des. Positive, ikimasu. I go every day, or I will go. Past, ikimashita. I went. Negative, habitual, ikimasen. I don't go, he doesn't go, I will not go. Or future, I will not go. Negative past, ikimasen deshita. Notice we have deshita at the end there. I did not go. Notice how des is included in the negative past, just like I just explained to you. Also, almost no verbs break this pattern. You simply change the mas to whatever you need it. It's either going to be mas, mashita, masen, or masen deshita. And that's how the mas form works. It's very easy to conjugate. There are more verb conjugations to be taught, but we're not going to do that here. Other verb-related information to look forward to. Verb stems and verb roots. The te form, the plain form, the eba, the are, the command forms, blah, 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 blah. That's about it for the mas verbs. Have yourself a great day. Check out Evan's Easy Japanese for more information. And I'm more than happy to receive donations. That'd be fantastic to get those. And also, clicking on ads gives me a few pennies. Have yourself a great day. Thank you very much for watching.